The first time you notice something is wrong, you don't think you're watching a relationship change. You think you're watching someone have a bad day. The message feels a little colder than usual. The conversation ends a little sooner. The enthusiasm that once seemed effortless feels slightly harder to find. None of it feels serious enough to worry about. People get tired. People get busy. People get distracted. So you move on. Most people do. The truth is that relationships rarely change in ways that are easy to identify. If they did, nobody would spend months wondering what happened. Nobody would replay conversations in their head looking for answers. Nobody would find themselves lying awake at night trying to remember the exact moment everything started feeling different. But that's exactly what happens. Because the most painful changes rarely arrive all at once. They arrive quietly. So quietly that by the time you recognize them, they've already become part of your everyday life. You remember how things felt in the beginning. Not because you're nostalgic. Because your mind keeps comparing the present to those early moments. Back then, conversations felt effortless. You'd wake up and see their name on your screen before you even had time to miss them. A simple message could improve your entire day. Hours disappeared inside conversations that weren't even about anything important. The subjects didn't matter. The person did. There was curiosity in everything. They wanted to know what you thought. They wanted to know what happened during your day. They remembered small details and brought them up later. You felt noticed in a way that made ordinary moments feel significant. Nothing felt forced. Nothing felt fragile. Nothing felt like work. And because it all felt so natural, you never noticed yourself becoming attached. The attachment didn't begin when you started loving them. It began when their attention became part of your routine. You hear something funny and immediately think about sending it to them. Something happens at work and your first instinct is to tell them. You find yourself looking forward to conversations before they've even happened. Without realizing it, they've become woven into the structure of your day. And that's why the change hurts later. Because when somebody becomes part of your routine, losing their attention doesn't feel like losing a moment. It feels like losing a piece of your everyday life. The first real sign is usually something small. So small that most people ignore it. You're telling a story and halfway through you realize they're only half listening. You send a message that would have started an hour-long conversation a few months ago and receive a response that ends it immediately. You share something that matters to you and notice they react without really engaging. Nothing dramatic happens. That's what makes it confusing. You can't point to a single moment and say, that's where everything changed. Instead, tiny moments begin collecting in the back of your mind. One after another. Like pieces of evidence you never wanted to gather. Then comes the waiting. Not the dramatic waiting people imagine. The quiet kind. The kind almost everyone has experienced but rarely admits. You send a message and put your phone down. 20 minutes later, you check it. Nothing. You tell yourself you're not checking for them. You just happen to pick up your phone. An hour passes. Then another. You open another app. Close it. Check again. Still nothing. The strange part isn't the silence. The strange part is how much space the silence occupies inside your head. You're making dinner and thinking about it. Watching something and thinking about it. Trying to focus on something else and still thinking about it. Eventually the message arrives. And the relief feels larger than it should. That's when something important has already changed. Not in the relationship. Inside you. Because you've started depending on moments that once simply made you happy. Most people don't recognize this shift while it's happening. They think they're becoming closer. What they're actually becoming is more emotionally invested than they realize. The relationship begins occupying more space inside their mind than it occupies inside the other person's. And that imbalance creates a very specific kind of loneliness. The kind that exists even when you're technically not alone. One afternoon you decide not to text first. Not as a game. Not as a strategy. You simply want to see what happens. The hours pass slower than they should. You check your phone more than you normally would. Then evening arrives. Then night. Eventually a message appears, but not because they were looking for you. They needed something. Wanted to share something. Had a question. And for the first time, you wonder how long the silence would have lasted if you hadn't always been the one keeping it from happening. That thought stays with you. Because once you've had it, you start noticing other things. You notice you're usually the one carrying conversations when they begin slowing down. You notice that plans happen more often when you suggest them. You notice that enthusiasm feels different now. Less natural. Less automatic. Less alive. Every time you notice one of these things, you immediately search for an explanation. They're stressed. They're busy. They're distracted. Sometimes those explanations are completely true. But even when they're true, they don't erase the feeling. The feeling remains. And feelings have a habit of returning when the world gets quiet. Especially at night. Because night removes distractions. The day ends. The conversations stop. The noise disappears. And suddenly you're left alone with your thoughts. One night you can't sleep. You open an old conversation looking for a photo, then find yourself reading messages from months ago. The difference is impossible to ignore. Back then the conversation moved effortlessly. One topic became another. Questions led to stories. Stories led to more questions. Nobody was trying. Nobody was carrying anything. The connection carried itself. You keep scrolling, almost searching for the exact point where everything changed. You never find it. Because relationships rarely break in a single moment. They drift. And drift is much harder to identify than a collision. As time passes, another change begins. You don't notice it immediately because it doesn't happen in the relationship. It happens inside you. You type a message, read it twice, then delete half of it before sending it. Not because anything was wrong with what you wrote. Because you're worried it might sound needy. A few days later, something bothers you. You think about mentioning it, then decide it's not worth creating tension. A week later, something else bothers you and you make the same decision again. Without realizing it, you're no longer speaking naturally. You're editing yourself before they ever get the chance to respond. People think heartbreak begins when someone leaves. Often it begins much earlier. It begins the moment you stop expressing yourself honestly because you're afraid of creating distance. The relationship still exists. But now you're protecting it instead of living inside it. And those are very different experiences. Then one day something happens that stays with you. Not because it's dramatic. Because it's revealing. Maybe you're sitting together. Maybe you're texting. Maybe you're around other people. The details don't matter. What matters is the moment. Someone else gets their attention. And for a few seconds you see a version of them that feels strangely familiar. Their curiosity appears. Their energy changes. Their enthusiasm returns. Nothing inappropriate happens. Nothing disloyal happens. Yet the image stays with you. Because you remember when they reacted that way to you. And suddenly you're not comparing yourself to another person. You're comparing the present relationship to its past version. That's what hurts. The realization that you're not competing with somebody else. You're competing with a memory. A memory that keeps winning. The hardest part is that nobody teaches you what to do when a relationship reaches this stage. The stage where nobody has left. Nobody has betrayed anyone. Nobody has officially ended anything. Yet something important feels missing. So you try harder. You become more patient. More understanding. More available. You give more because part of you still believes enough effort can bring back what once existed naturally. But effort cannot manufacture curiosity. Effort cannot force enthusiasm. Effort cannot recreate the feeling of being genuinely wanted. And eventually you start feeling the weight of that reality. The exhaustion. The confusion. The sadness. The realization that you've spent months trying to revive a feeling that used to happen on its own. That's when the truth finally becomes impossible to ignore. The realization arrives quietly. You aren't sitting there missing a stranger. They're still in your life. You still talk. The relationship still exists. What you miss is the version of them that noticed everything. The version that asked one more question before ending the conversation. The version that seemed genuinely curious about your thoughts. And that's what makes this kind of loss so confusing. The person is still here. The feeling isn't. Everyone wants to feel important to the people they love. Everyone wants to feel seen. And when that feeling begins disappearing, something changes inside the relationship. You can survive without constant affection. You can survive without endless compliments. But it's much harder to survive feeling invisible. Especially when you remember exactly what visibility felt like. That's why this experience stays with people for years. Not because of how it ended. Because of how gradually it changed. The slow transition from being noticed to being expected. From being chosen to being assumed. From being appreciated to becoming familiar. And familiarity is strange. It rarely destroys relationships overnight. It simply changes the way people experience each other until one day you're standing beside someone who once made you feel unforgettable and wondering when you became ordinary. Maybe that's why this hurts so much. Not because love disappeared. Because somewhere along the way, being loved stopped feeling the same as being valued. And those are not always the same thing. If this felt uncomfortably familiar, subscribe for more psychological explorations of human behavior.